The envelope smelled like his cologne. Even before opening it, I knew it wasn't just about the divorce, it was about my land. The afternoon sun dipped low, throwing streaks of gold across the kitchen's weathered oak counters. Alright, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor, subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. My father built this kitchen, hand-sanded every beam, argued with my mother over the placement of the windows so the morning light would always land on the breakfast table. It still smelled faintly of him, of soil and Cabernet grapes and the cedar soap he used after a day in the fields. This room had been my refuge. Until now. The envelope sat on the counter like a loaded weapon. Heavy cream cardstock. My name, Claire Montgomery, in David's lawyer's cold, looping script. And that smell. His cologne. Subtle, woodsy, expensive. I hated that I recognized it. Hated more that my pulse still spiked when I did. Just paperwork, I whispered, trying to convince myself. But I already knew better. David never did anything without intent. I slid a finger beneath the flap. The paper rasped as it tore, a sound like skin breaking. Inside, pages upon pages of legalese, each word colder than the next. Division of assets. Liquidation of joint accounts. Requests for business valuations. And there it was, buried on page 6 under a mountain of jargon, the vineyard. My vineyard. I felt the blood rush to my ears. He didn't just want money. He wanted this land. I leaned back against the counter, clutching the papers to my chest like they might burn me if I let go. Outside, the vines rolled in quiet rows under the early autumn sky, leaves blushing gold and crimson. My father used to say the vines were alive, that they felt who walked among them. They know when you're angry, Claire. They know when you're at peace. I wondered what they'd feel from me now. Bastard, I breathed. I shouldn't have been surprised. David had always been a man who took what he wanted, when he wanted it, cloaking greed in that easy smile and a voice smooth enough to sell snake oil. When we first met, I'd called it ambition. Now I know better. The vineyard wasn't just dirt and vines to me. It was a legacy. My father's hands in the soil. My childhood summers racing through the rows. My mother's laughter echoing off the barrels in the cellar before she got sick. And later, my own blood and sweat poured into every harvest. To David, it was just acreage. A prime slice of Napa to fold into one of his ostentatious lifestyle developments. I could already see his vision, glass and steel resorts, luxury tasting rooms, helicopter pads where my family's vines once stood. He didn't care about wine or history or my father's ghost. He cared about profit. I pressed my palms flat against the counter, forcing myself to breathe. This wasn't just about a divorce anymore. He wanted to erase me. My phone buzzed, Elena, probably. She'd been texting since this morning, wanting to check in, to remind me that I wasn't alone. But I didn't answer. Not yet. I walked to the window, staring out at the rows of vines stretching toward the horizon, their shadows long and soft in the fading light. My father always said the vineyard could take anything you threw at it, a storm, a drought, even heartbreak, and still find a way to grow. Maybe I could, too. I read the last line of the letter again. His lawyer's words were careful, calculated. But all I saw was David's smirk between the lines. You can't win. I've already taken everything that matters. My hands trembled as I folded the papers, but not from fear. From something sharper. Anger. Resolve. I whispered it before I could think better of it, my voice low and steady, like a promise. If he wants my vineyard so badly, maybe I'll give him more than he can handle. At night, the vines whisper, reminding me who I'm fighting for, my father, myself, and the dream we built. It's quiet at this hour. Too quiet, almost. When the sun dips behind the hills and the tourists retreat to their tasting rooms and boutique inns, the valley belongs to the ghosts. My boots crunch against the soil as I walk between the rows, the cool air carrying the faintest scent of crushed grapes. The vines sway with the evening breeze like they're breathing. Like they're alive. My father used to say they were. Treat them like people, Claire, he told me once, kneeling between the rows with those calloused hands stained deep with soil and Cabernet. I was 10, too impatient to care. They'll get back what you give them. They'll take what you feel. So you'd better be sure of what you bring here. I'd roll my eyes, then, but I'd remember it years later, kneeling beside him as an adult, my knees aching, my hands blistered, learning how to read the earth like a language. I pause at one of the older vines, tracing the gnarled trunk with my fingers. My father planted this one the year I was born. We grew together. And now, both of us are still standing, scarred but unbroken. A car door slams near the house. I glance up toward the glow of the porch light, half expecting David's shadow. Old instincts die hard. But it's Elena, striding toward me with the confidence of someone who belongs here. Only you would be in the field at 9 o'clock at night, she calls out, her voice teasing but laced with concern. I smile faintly. Better than pacing inside. Elena Rodriguez has been my anchor for years, the kind of friend who'll pour you a glass of wine and call you out in the same breath. She's dressed like she always is, a flowing floral wrap dress, bold earrings catching the light. Completely impractical for a vineyard at night. But that's Elena. She joins me in the row, her heels sinking slightly into the dirt. So, she says, folding her arms. You got the letter. I nod, my chest tightening. She whistles softly. I told you, Claire. He's going to play dirty. You need to be ready. I keep my gaze fixed on the vines. He wants the land. Not just the vineyard, the whole thing. Her head tilts. Why would he care about the surrounding parcels? They're just. I cut her off, shaking my head. They're not just. I went digging. I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the document I'd been obsessing over since the envelope arrived. He's building more than a house, Elena. He's planning a resort. She blinks. Wait. A resort? Out here? Yeah. My voice is steady now, but underneath, my blood hums. And the funny thing? Half of it, the fancy new access road, some of the utility lines, runs through land he doesn't even realize I own. Elena stares at me, processing. You mean? Exactly. We start walking back toward the house. My mind races with possibilities, with all the ways this information could be my weapon. David, in his arrogance, probably assumed I'd never think to check the county development records. He still thinks of me as the woman who sat quietly beside him at business dinners, smiling and nodding while he negotiated deals over my head. I push open the screen door and lead Elena to the dining table, cluttered with legal papers, my laptop, and a bottle of Cabernet I'd uncorked hours ago but barely touched. Claire, she says softly, placing a hand on my arm. You're shaking. I glance down at my hands, only now realizing she's right. He's not just taking me to court, I murmur. He's trying to erase me. For a moment, Elena looks like she's going to argue. But then she squeezes my arm instead. Then don't let him. Her voice steadies me. I sit down and spread the valley map across the table. The paper smells faintly of ink and dust, decades of ownership lines and surveyor notes crisscrossing the terrain. My terrain. I study the highlighted parcels, my heartbeat evening out. My vineyard. My father's land. And the surrounding acres that David doesn't even know he needs me for. I trace the boundary with my fingertip, a slow smile creeping across my face. He doesn't even know what I own, I whisper. I meet Elena's eyes, and for the first time all night, I feel the spark of control. Good. It's just business, David smirked, like he hadn't gutted me in every way that mattered. The lawyer's office smells like polished wood and money. It's the kind of space designed to make people feel small, towering bookshelves, a massive mahogany desk, sunlight slicing through half-closed blinds. I sit across from David, my soon-to-be ex-husband, the man who taught me how to doubt my own instincts. He hasn't changed. Still dressed like he's about to pose for a magazine cover, dark tailored suit, shirt open just enough to project confidence, his silver watch catching every bit of light. His hair is perfect. His smile, practiced. I wonder if he rehearsed it in the mirror before coming here. His lawyer, a younger man with a voice like sandpaper, drones on about equitable division of assets. I don't hear most of it. I can't, not over the static in my head, the memories clawing their way up, David whispering promises in this same tone, David convincing me to sign away control of decisions for efficiency, David turning my home into a stage for his ambitions. Finally, he speaks directly to me. You know, he says, leaning back in his chair like this is all casual, like we're not here to carve up a life together, it doesn't have to be this painful. I'm offering you a clean out. Cash. You can start over somewhere nice. Somewhere nice, I repeat, my voice steady, though I feel heat rising under my skin. Yes, he says. Take the money, Claire. Do something different. Napa's been good to you, but it's time to move on. Move on. As if this land is some rental I can pack up and leave behind. My lawyer clears her throat beside me, probably sensing the spike in my pulse. She told me not to engage, not to let him pull me into his emotional quicksand. But the way he's looking at me, like I'm already a ghost in my own life, makes my nails dig crescents into my palm. And the vineyard? I ask. He waves a hand like it's a trivial detail. I'll fold it into the development. We'll keep the name, of course, Montgomery Vineyard. Legacy branding. I know how much that means to you. There it is. The knife twisted. He doesn't just want my land. He wants my father's name. Legacy branding, I echo. My voice is calm, but my chest feels like it's caving in. David leans forward, smiling like a predator that knows the game is already won. You don't have to worry. I'll take care of it. Like I've always taken care of you. There it is, the old script. The one he used to keep me in line. You can't survive without me. You need me to make things work. I almost laugh. Not because it's funny, but because it's so familiar. He doesn't see me at all. He sees the Claire who used to shrink under his hand on my shoulder. The Claire who believed him when he said she wasn't strong enough to stand alone. But I'm not her anymore. You really think I'm desperate, don't you? I say. His brows lift slightly. Aren't you? The room goes quiet. Even his lawyer shifts uncomfortably in his chair. I lean forward just enough for him to see the smile I've been saving for this moment. It's small. Sharp. The kind that doesn't reach my eyes. No, I say softly. I'm not. His smile falters, just a flicker, but I catch it. I reach for the papers in front of me. David probably thinks I'm giving in, that I'm finally folding like I always did when his voice got low and commanding. He's wrong. I sign my name with deliberate strokes. Not on his buyout agreement, but on another document, one my lawyer prepared without David knowing. The pen feels heavy in my hand, like a weapon. I slide it back across the table to my lawyer. David leans forward, trying to read what I've done. What's that? I meet his gaze, my smile widening just enough to make him uneasy. Not what you think, I say. My lawyer gathers the papers before he can snatch them. We'll be in touch, she tells him, her tone crisp. I stand, smoothing my blazer, letting the silence stretch between us. David's mask doesn't slip often, but now? Now I see it, a hairline crack in his confidence. As I walk out of that office, I don't feel broken. I feel dangerous. When I told him I wanted to sell, he nearly dropped his cigar. He knew something was off, but couldn't figure out what. Richard Hale's office smells like wealth, not the new kind, but the old. Polished mahogany. Aged leather. Cigars that cost more than most people's mortgages. It feels like walking into a lion's den, and I can't decide if I'm prey or another predator learning the terrain. He's exactly how people describe him, tall, broad-shouldered, with silver hair swept back just enough to look effortlessly distinguished. His suit is navy, perfectly cut. There's a ring on his finger that probably has its own insurance policy. When he shakes my hand, I notice his grip, firm but not crushing. This is a man who wins battles without ever raising his voice. He gestures to a leather chair across from his desk. Claire Montgomery. I've been expecting you. Of course he has. Men like Richard always know when a distressed asset, be it a property, a business, or a person, is about to hit the market. Can I offer you a drink? He asks. Not yet, I say. Let's see if we're in business first. That earns me a smirk. He likes games. Good. I pull out the folder I've been carrying since my meeting with David's lawyer. I slide the first set of documents across the desk. My vineyard. I'm interested in selling. He picks up the papers, scanning them without much reaction. Plenty of people are interested in selling these days. But you're different. He looks up, studying me like I'm one of his investment portfolios. Why? I lean back, crossing my legs. Because this isn't just about my vineyard. He tilts his head. Go on. I pull out the second folder, laying out the survey maps I'd spent days poring over. I also own the surrounding parcels. I tap the highlighted areas with my finger. Including the land David Montgomery needs for his house and his resort project. That gets him. His brow arches, and his cigar pauses mid-air. Ah, he says slowly. Now we're talking. Buying my vineyard alone? That's pocket change to you, I say. But buying the whole valley? That's leverage. David's leverage. His smirk widens. You know what I like about you, Claire? You don't waste my time. I'm not here to beg for an offer, I say, keeping my tone even. I'm here to make you one. I'll sell the vineyard and every surrounding parcel I own. But it has to be fast. No public bidding. One clean, quiet transaction. He leans back in his chair, tapping ash into a crystal tray. You do realize the kind of heat that comes with this deal, right? Montgomery will lose his mind. The man's already reckless. Corner him, and who knows what he'll do. I'm counting on it. He laughs, a deep, surprised sound. You're either brilliant or completely unhinged. Maybe both, I say. The room falls quiet for a moment, just the crackle of the fireplace between us. He studies me, weighing whether I'm bluffing. Whether I'm desperate. Whether I know exactly what I'm doing. I let the silence stretch. I've learned that if you let men like David and Richard fill up first, they'll tell you everything you need to know. Finally, Richard leans forward, elbows on the desk, voice lower now. If I do this, and that's a big if, you understand what happens next, don't you? You won't just inconvenience Montgomery. You'll humiliate him. You'll destroy him. I hold his gaze. That's the idea. Another long pause. Then, slowly, he grins. It's not a friendly grin, it's the grin of a man who sees profit and blood in the water. You've got nerve, he says. And you've got money, I reply. He lets out a single amused breath, then taps the papers on the desk with 2 fingers. If we do this, Claire, he leans closer, his voice a low rumble. You'll own him. I don't flinch. Good. Are you ready for that? The pen trembled in my hand. Once I signed, there was no going back, not for me, not for him. The conference room was too bright for the kind of deal being made here. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, catching the chrome fixtures and making everything look cleaner than it felt. The papers were stacked neatly on the polished table between Richard and me, but their weight felt unbearable, decades of my family's legacy reduced to a handful of signatures. Richard sat across from me, cool and composed, as if we weren't dismantling my life. He had that effortless calm of a man who'd signed away more land than I'd ever walked on. The smell of his cologne mixed with the faint smoke of the cigar he'd just stubbed out in a crystal tray. He was already thinking 3 moves ahead. I was still stuck in the past. My father's voice echoed in my head. This land isn't just dirt, Claire. It's who we are. Don't let anyone take that from you. And yet here I was, about to give it away. My hand hovered over the pen, fingers cold and clammy. It wasn't David's voice that haunted me, it was my father's. Every inch of this land had his fingerprints. The worn soil where he taught me to prune. The old barn he refused to tear down even when it leaned so hard I thought a strong wind would carry it away. The oak tree we buried him under when the cancer finally took him. Selling to Richard felt like betraying him. Claire, Richard's voice cut through my thoughts, steady and unflinching. You don't have to do this. But if you do, I promise you, it won't just be a sale. It'll be a reckoning. I swallowed hard. That was the only reason I was here. Not for money. Not for freedom. But for revenge. I picked up the pen. My fingers wouldn't stop shaking. Don't sign something you can't live with, Elena's voice came from the doorway. She'd been pacing outside but now stepped in, arms crossed over her floral wrap dress like armor. I didn't look at her. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do. She walked closer, lowering her voice. Claire, this isn't you. This is him. This is David getting into your head, making you do something out of anger. I forced myself to meet her eyes. Anger is the only thing keeping me upright right now. She flinched, like I'd slapped her. And what happens when that's gone? The truth sat between us, sharp and heavy. I didn't know. But I knew one thing, David wouldn't stop. Not until I was erased. I turned back to the papers. Once you sign, it's done, Richard said, leaning forward slightly. Montgomery will know. The whole valley will know. Are you ready for that? I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. I've been ready since the day I found out what he was building. I put the pen to the paper and signed my name. The sound of the ink scratching across the page was deafening. With every stroke, I felt the weight of my father's vineyard slipping out of my grasp, but something else took its place. Power. Cold, terrifying, liberating power. When I pushed the papers back to Richard, he didn't smile, but I saw it in his eyes, respect. It's done, he said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest felt hollow, my throat tight. Elena put a hand on my shoulder, her touch soft, cautious. Claire, she said gently. Are you sure? No, I whispered. But it's the only way. For a moment, none of us spoke. The room was too quiet, like it was holding its breath with me. Then my phone rang, vibrating violently against the table. I didn't need to check the caller ID. I picked it up. Why is there a sold sign on my future driveway, Claire? David's voice snarled through the speaker. My fingers tightened around the phone. I could almost hear his smirk cracking beneath the rage. His voice on the phone wasn't David's. It was a wounded animal, cornered and ready to bite. I hadn't even had time to put my phone down before I heard the tire screeching. The growl of his engine tore through the quiet like an alarm. My stomach tightened. By the time I reached the front door, he was already there, David, in a charcoal suit with his tie yanked loose, his face flushed red, a storm barely contained. He didn't knock. He barged in like he still owned the place, like divorce papers and court dates hadn't changed a damn thing. Claire, he barked, slamming the door behind him. What the hell did you do? I stayed by the kitchen island, putting the counter between us like a barrier. I think you already know. His eyes were wild, bloodshot. He'd been drinking, or hadn't slept, or both. The entire valley? You sold the entire damn valley to Richard Hale? I didn't answer. He stalked toward me, his shoes heavy against the old hardwood. Do you even understand what you've done? Do you have any idea what this means? I know exactly what it means, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. He laughed, a cruel, disbelieving sound. You think this is some kind of victory? Claire, you've ruined everything. Everything. I crossed my arms, forcing myself to look at him, not through him. No, David. I ruined your plans. Don't confuse the two. You stupid, he caught himself, biting back the word like he was tasting poison. Do you think Hale bought that land because he cares about you? Because he gives a damn about your precious vineyard? He leaned across the counter, his face inches from mine. He bought it to bury me. And you helped him. The words hit their mark, but I didn't flinch. Good, I said quietly. His jaw tightened. You're not this person. You're not cold enough for this. This isn't you. You don't know me anymore, I shot back. Maybe you never did. For a moment, the only sound was his breathing, shallow, ragged. He raked his hands through his hair and turned away, pacing the room like a caged animal. Do you know what you've cost me? Cost you? I almost laughed. You were willing to bulldoze everything my father built just to build another monument to yourself. You don't get to cry about loss now. He whipped back toward me, slamming his hand on the counter so hard the wine glasses rattled. You think this ends me? He growled. No. This ends you. That land, your little valley, that was the only thing tying you to this place. Now you're just a bitter ex-wife with nothing. I felt the sting of his words, but I didn't let him see it. I wouldn't give him that power anymore. You're wrong, I said. His face twisted, ugly with rage. You've made a mistake you can't come back from. No, David. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. You're just mad that for once in your life, you didn't see it coming. That broke through his composure. He shoved away from the counter, storming toward the door. This isn't over, he snapped, turning back to glare at me one last time. His voice dropped to a growl, low and menacing. You think you've won? You don't know what's coming. The door slammed so hard the walls shook. I thought selling the valley would end the war. Instead, it only changed the battlefield. The first call came from a neighboring winemaker. The second from a local council member. By the third, I stopped answering. Claire, what have you done? Do you know what Richard Hale does to land like this? You didn't even give us a chance to fight it." Their voices bled together, an endless chorus of disappointment and accusation. It didn't matter how many times I told myself I'd done this for survival, for strategy, their anger clung to me like smoke. By the time I walked into town for coffee, the whispers were already waiting. People who used to wave at me now turned their heads. At the cafe, two women at the corner table lowered their voices the second I stepped inside, their eyes sharp and cutting. "Sold out. Her father would be ashamed. Guess David broke her after all." I wanted to turn around and leave, but I forced myself to stand in line. I needed to see it, feel it. I needed to know exactly what I'd set in motion. The barista, usually chatty, handed me my coffee in silence. Her fingers brushed mine, then pulled away quickly, like I'd burned her. By the time I made it back to my car, my hands were trembling. This isn't about them, I told myself. This is about David. But was it? As I drove back to the vineyard, my vineyard, for now, I kept seeing my father's face. He used to walk through the town shaking hands with the same people now cursing my name. He believed in community, in roots deeper than profit. I had told myself I was protecting his legacy, but sitting here, in the heat of their judgment, it didn't feel like protection. It felt like betrayal. Elena was waiting for me when I got home. She stood on the porch, arms crossed, face tight with frustration. "You weren't picking up," she said. "I didn't want to talk." "That's the problem," she shot back. "You need to talk. To me. To them. To anyone who'll listen before David spins this into something worse." I almost laughed. "It's already worse." "Not if you get ahead of it," she said. "But you won't, will you? You'll just hole up here and wait for the world to burn." I opened my mouth to argue, but my phone buzzed. A new notification. Another article. Greedy ex-wife sells family land to predatory developer. Below the headline, David's face, perfectly composed, giving some quote about grieving for the destruction of Napa's cultural heritage, while praying Claire finds peace. I nearly threw the phone across the room. "Unstable and greedy," Elena said, reading over my shoulder. Classic David. My chest ached, a familiar tightness settling in, the same one I used to feel in our marriage when he twisted every fight into my fault. "Claire." Elena's voice softened. "You need to fight back. Go public. Tell your side." I shook my head. "That's exactly what he wants. A public spectacle. Then what's your plan?" "Because right now, it looks like he's winning." I hated her for saying it, mostly because it was true. The sky outside had gone dark by the time Elena finally sat me down at the kitchen table. I stared at the map still spread out from days ago, the boundaries I'd memorized, the pieces I'd used to outmaneuver him. And yet, it didn't feel like I was winning anymore. Elena's phone buzzed this time. She picked it up, her expression shifting from irritation to something closer to dread. "Claire," her voice was careful, too careful. "What?" She handed me the screen. "David Montgomery files emergency motion against Claire Montgomery, claims fraudulent land sale, seeks injunction." My blood ran cold. "He's taking me back to court?" "Not just court," Elena said grimly. "He's trying to undo everything." Facing him in court felt like being dragged back into our marriage, a cage I thought I'd escape. The courtroom smelled of disinfectant and fear. Not the sharp, obvious kind, but the quiet one, the kind that sits under your tongue like metal. I stood at the defense table, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles ached. David sat across the aisle, immaculate as ever. Slate gray suit. Blue tie. The sympathetic businessman look. His expression was carefully composed, measured concern for the judge, mild disappointment for the gallery, and just a flicker of satisfaction for me. He knew what he was doing. He always did. The hum of whispered conversations buzzed around us. Local reporters sat in the back, pens poised, hungry for quotes. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a performance. And David had always been better at performing than me. "Your Honor," his lawyer began, voice rich and authoritative, "my client is not here to disparage Ms. Montgomery. He is here because he has been wronged. This sale," he gestured toward me like I was a criminal, "was made in bad faith. It was done with the deliberate intent to sabotage Mr. Montgomery's ongoing development project, causing irreparable harm to his business and reputation." Reputation. The word tasted bitter. David wielded his like a shield, knowing damn well how many bodies he'd buried to protect it. I forced myself to look up at the bench. Judge Carter was everything David hated in a woman, sharp, unflappable, and uninterested in charm. But that didn't mean she'd be on my side. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Jennifer, rose. "Your Honor, my client was fully within her rights to sell property she legally owns. Mr. Montgomery's displeasure is not grounds to nullify a valid transaction." David leaned forward, theatrically resting his forehead in his hand like this was all too much for his delicate soul. I wanted to scream. Instead, I breathed. In. Out. David's lawyer continued, "This was not an ordinary sale. It was targeted. Malicious. Ms. Montgomery acted with the sole intent of inflicting personal and financial damage on my client. That constitutes fraud under California law." Fraud. The word hit me like a slap. Jennifer whispered, "Don't react." But how could I not? Fraud. He wasn't just calling me vengeful, he was painting me as a criminal. The judge glanced at me, then back at him. "Mr. Montgomery, do you have evidence to support these claims?" David stood. Always dramatic. Always taking center stage. "Your Honor, I have documentation showing Ms. Montgomery deliberately withheld her sale plans from the court, knowing it would compromise my legal right to negotiate marital assets in good faith. She weaponized the sale to Richard Hale, who, I might add, has been a long-time adversary of mine, to inflict personal and financial harm. This wasn't a transaction. It was an ambush." He looked right at me when he said it. The gallery murmured. Judge Carter rapped her gavel once, silencing the room. Jennifer stood again, her voice even. "Your Honor, opposing counsel's narrative is colorful, but Ms. Montgomery's sale was lawful and strategically sound. We reject the characterization of malicious intent. Business decisions are not fraud simply because they inconvenience Mr. Montgomery." But her words felt smaller than his. As the lawyers volleyed, I sank into my chair, staring at the wood grain of the table. Was I wrong? Had I gone too far? My plan had been bold, deliberate, but was that the same as bad faith? David caught my eye and smirked. Just for a second. Just enough to remind me that this, like everything with him, was a game. And he thought he was winning. Finally, Judge Carter raised a hand. "Enough. We're not here to litigate feelings. We are here to assess whether there's cause to challenge the validity of the sale." The room went still. She shuffled a few papers, then looked up at me. "We'll reconvene in 2 weeks. Ms. Montgomery." Her eyes lingered, unreadable. "You may not like where this is going. Sometimes survival isn't about fighting harder, it's about fighting smarter." The courthouse was still clinging to me like smoke when I pulled into Richard Hale's estate. My heart hadn't slowed since Judge Carter's words. "You may not like where this is going." Richard was waiting in his study, leaning casually against that same mahogany desk as if nothing in the world could rattle him. A half-empty glass of whiskey sat at his elbow. You look like hell, he said, lifting an eyebrow. Thanks, I muttered, collapsing into the leather chair across from him. You're letting him get to you, Richard said. That's what he wants. I stared at him, incredulous. Did you not hear what happened in court? He's calling me a fraud. He's trying to undo the deal. Richard swirled his drink, unfazed. I've seen worse. My nails dug into the armrest. That's comforting. He smirked. It should be. Because it means I know how to handle it. I exhaled, somewhere between exhausted and annoyed. You seem very sure of yourself. Confidence comes from knowing the game better than the other guy, he said simply. I wanted to argue, to tell him that this wasn't just a game. This was my life. But as I looked around his office, at the cigar smoke curling in the air, the endless shelves of books and awards, the empire he'd built, I realized something. Richard had been in this arena longer than David. Longer than me. He'd fought these wars and walked away richer every time. He leaned forward. I didn't just buy your land, Claire. I bought myself a position on the board of David Montgomery's life. And now you? You get to move the pieces with me. My brow furrowed. What are you talking about? He reached into a drawer and slid a folder across the desk. Consulting contract. For my Vineyard expansion project. I blinked at it, then at him. You want to hire me? Not want, he corrected. Need. You know the land. The soil. The history. I can't think of anyone better to guide the next phase of development. I hesitated, my fingers hovering over the folder. Why me? Really? Because, Richard said, his tone flattening into steel, it'll drive David insane knowing you're not just the woman who sold me his future, you're the woman shaping it. The words hit me like a jolt. For weeks, I'd been reacting. Surviving. Dodging David's blows and bracing for the next one. But this? This was offense. I don't know, I said, my voice quieter than I meant. It feels wrong. What feels wrong? Using this as revenge, I admitted. Richard chuckled. Claire, this isn't revenge. This is business. If you don't want to think about it as fighting back, then think about it as protecting your legacy. Your father didn't build that vineyard for David Montgomery. He built it for you. Maybe it doesn't look like what you planned. But it's still yours, if you take it. I stared at the contract. My father's voice echoed in my head again, the vines will give back what you give them. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was purpose. I opened the folder and scanned the terms. A generous consulting fee. Creative oversight on the expansion. Full access to the development plans. It wasn't ownership, but it was power, quiet, surgical power. When do I start? I asked. Richard's grin was sharp. Welcome to the team. For the first time in weeks, the hollow pit in my stomach began to fill, not with fear, but with something steadier. Resolve. As I walked out to my car, Elena was waiting by the gate, her arms crossed tight. You didn't answer my texts, she said. I've been busy, I replied, trying to keep the spark in my chest hidden. Her eyes narrowed. Busy with what? I hesitated. Richard offered me a consulting role. For the expansion. Her face paled. You said yes? Yes. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to a hiss. Claire, if David finds out you're working with Richard. She grabbed my arm, squeezing hard. You're dead. Trust is a fragile currency. And I just found out I'd been spending it on the wrong people. It took less than 48 hours for David to find out about my consulting contract with Richard. 48 hours. I didn't need to see his face to know how he reacted. His voice over the phone said enough, a venom-laced calm, the kind that only came before a storm. Working with him now? You've really gone off the deep end, Claire. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. He just hung up, which somehow felt worse. Richard swore he hadn't told anyone. His people were under ironclad NDAs. Which meant the leak came from my side. There weren't many people on my side. Elena. She was the only one who knew about the contract. I wanted to dismiss the thought immediately. Elena, who had been with me through the darkest nights, who had held my hair back when I broke down over David, who had reminded me who I was when I forgot. But the thought wouldn't leave. When I got home, she was already in my kitchen, leaning against the counter with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses, like nothing had changed. "You're ignoring me," she said casually, pouring a generous glass for herself. "I've been busy," I replied, tossing my bag onto a chair. "With Richard?" Her tone was light, but I heard the edge beneath it. "You tell me," I said. She froze, glass halfway to her lips. "What's that supposed to mean?" I walked closer, crossing my arms. "David knows about the contract. The only people who knew were me, Richard, and you." Her mouth fell open. "You think I told him?" "I think it's strange how fast he found out." Her face twisted. "Wow. That's where we're at? After everything? You really think I'd run to David?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to believe her. But all I could see was David's smirk in that courtroom, his words dripping with too much confidence. "Elena," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "You've been saying since the start that I'm letting anger cloud my judgment. Maybe you thought this was your way of, I don't know, stopping me." Her laugh was sharp, ugly. "You think I'd betray you for your own good? That's rich. Then help me understand how he knows," I snapped. "I don't know," she yelled, slamming her glass onto the counter so hard it cracked. "But I do know this. If you're going to start turning on me every time David breathes down your neck, maybe you don't deserve my loyalty." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. We stood there in silence, 2 women who used to share everything now staring at each other like strangers. Finally, she grabbed her bag. "Figure out who your real enemies are, Claire," she said, her voice low and shaking. "Because right now, it looks like you don't have a damn clue." The door slammed behind her, and just like that, my house felt emptier than it had in months. I sank into a chair, rubbing my temples. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe paranoia had burrowed too deep, David's poison still working through my veins. Or maybe I wasn't paranoid enough. My phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. "You don't deserve what's coming. Leave Napa now." My stomach dropped. The note wasn't a warning. It was a promise. The first one came tucked under my windshield wiper. A folded scrap of paper with 3 words scrawled in red ink, "Leave now, Claire." By the third, I stopped pretending it was some drunk local with a grudge. The latest one was pinned to my front porch with a rusted nail. I didn't touch it at first, just stared at it in the weak porch light, heart pounding. The words were the same as the first 2, but now there was an addition. "Leave now, Claire. Or we'll make you." The "we" felt deliberate. I couldn't tell if it made me feel more or less afraid. I yanked it free and crumpled it in my fist, but my hands were trembling. It didn't stop there. A few days later, I found one of the storage sheds broken into. Nothing stolen, just smashed. Empty bottles shattered across the dirt floor. A message spray-painted across the wall in sloppy, uneven letters, "Sell T.O. David." The vines near the southern parcel weren't spared either. Someone had slashed through them in the night, destroying whole rows of grapes that had taken years to nurture. It felt personal, surgical. Someone wanted me to feel the loss in my bones. For the first time since this all started, I locked every door. By day, I tried to stay focused, meetings with Richard, phone calls with my lawyer, pushing forward like none of this was shaking me. But by night, when the house went quiet, my bravado slipped. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing every creak of the old wood, every whisper of wind against the windows, wondering if someone was out there. This is what David wants, I told myself. To make you paranoid. To make you run. But deep down, I wasn't sure it was just David. Richard insisted he'd tighten security on the property. Elena, when she finally answered my calls, offered to stay the night, but I couldn't bring myself to say yes. I didn't know if I could handle her being there, not when I still wasn't sure if she'd betrayed me. Fear crawled under my skin, but so did something else, defiance. They wanted me gone. They wanted me small. They wanted me to feel like prey. But this was my land. My father's land. I wouldn't leave. It was near midnight when I heard it, the crunch of footsteps on gravel outside. I froze. At first, I told myself it was an animal. A raccoon. A stray dog. Anything but what it really sounded like, a person. I grabbed the baseball bat from under the bed, a relic from a time when I thought I'd only need it for field pests, and crept toward the window. The porch light buzzed faintly, casting weak illumination across the yard. That's when I saw it. A figure standing just beyond the tree line. Too far to make out their face, too still to be an animal. Just standing there. Watching. My breath caught in my throat. David? I called out, though I already knew it wasn't him. David didn't skulk in the dark. David would have marched right through the front door like before. The figure didn't move. My fingers tightened around the bat. Who's there? I shouted, forcing more strength into my voice than I felt. Nothing. Then, without warning, they turned and bolted into the vines. I didn't chase. I couldn't. My legs felt glued to the floor. For a long moment, I just stood there, staring at the empty yard, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. The man at my door wasn't a threat. He was holding the key to everything. I wasn't sleeping much anymore, but that night I hadn't even bothered trying. I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cold cup of coffee and staring at the last threatening note like I could will it to tell me who had written it. The knock startled me so badly I nearly dropped the mug. It was just after 2 a.m. I froze, listening. Another knock, harder this time. Gripping the baseball bat, I crept to the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood on my porch. Late 40s, maybe early 50s, weathered face, scruffy beard. He wore a faded work jacket and jeans stained with God knows what. His hands were empty, held slightly away from his sides like he knew how threatening this would look to a woman alone at night. Claire Montgomery, he called, his voice low but steady. My heart hammered. What do you want? I demanded through the door. I need to talk to you. It's about David Montgomery. That got my attention. I hesitated, weighing the risk. He could be one of David's guys. He could be the person leaving the notes. But then again, if he'd wanted to hurt me, he wouldn't be knocking. I unlocked the door but kept the bat in my grip. Talk. Fast. He stepped back slightly, keeping his distance. My name's Tom Reyes. I used to work for David. Construction contractor. I quit when he stopped paying me. Stopped paying you? He nodded grimly. David owes me over 50 grand. He owes a lot of people more than that. That's why I'm here. You need to understand what's going on. I studied his face. Tired. Angry. But there was something else too, fear. Why me? I asked. Because, Tom said, lowering his voice, you're the reason he's drowning. I blinked. Excuse me? Tom glanced around nervously, like someone might be listening from the dark. His resort project? It's smoke and mirrors. He doesn't have the financing. Not anymore. He was banking on using your parcels as collateral for a line of credit. Without them, he's stuck. Bankrupt. He can't even finish building his own house out there. I felt my breath catch. You're saying, this whole time, the project was a bluff? Tom nodded. A con. He promised investors luxury villas, a golf course, a world-class spa. But the man doesn't have two nickels to rub together without that land. You pulled the rug out from under him, Claire. I leaned against the doorframe, the pieces clicking together in my head. That's why he'd been so smug at first, he thought I'd break. He thought I'd fold and hand him what he needed. And when I didn't? This wasn't just about ego. It wasn't just about revenge. It was survival. Tom continued, you need to be careful. I've seen men in his position do stupid things. Desperate things. The room seemed to tilt. The threats, the vandalism, the shadow in the vines, it all felt sharper now. He's not just angry, I murmured, mostly to myself. Tom tilted his head. What? I swallowed hard, my grip tightening on the bat even though I didn't need it anymore. He's desperate, I said, feeling the weight of it settle over me like a cold fog. And desperate men? They didn't care how much damage they caused on their way down. The only thing scarier than losing everything is knowing you're about to take everything from someone else. By morning, I'd made my decision. If David wanted a war, I'd give him one. I spread the documents Tom had given me across the kitchen table, unpaid invoices, cancelled contracts, bank notices. A paper trail of arrogance and desperation. It was more than enough to sink him if it got into the right hands. But it wasn't just David I'd be destroying. It was the whole illusion. The resort, the house, the image he'd spent years curating. I would tear it all down. And part of me wondered if that made me any different than him. I caught my reflection in the window, pale, hollow-eyed, hair pulled back in a messy bun. I didn't look like myself. I looked like someone forged in fire, all edges, and steel. My father wouldn't have recognized me. I wasn't sure I recognized me. Elena's voice echoed in my head, you're letting anger cloud your judgment. But was this anger, or survival? I called Marcus Shaw, an investigative journalist I knew from the local paper, a man who lived for stories like this. He met me at a cafe off the main road, away from the Vineyard, away from eyes that might report back to David. Marcus was sharp, mid-40s, glasses slipping down his nose, always carrying a recorder. He listened carefully as I laid out everything. When I slid the documents across the table, his eyes widened. You know what you're handing me? He asked. Yes. My voice didn't shake. I want it public. Everything. His debt. His fake promises to investors. The way he tried to use my land as collateral for a project he couldn't afford. Marcus leaned back, studying me. This'll ruin him. I know. And you're okay with that? That question stayed with me longer than I wanted it to. I stared down at my coffee, the dark surface rippling from the tremor in my hand. He's been ruining me for years. This isn't revenge, Marcus. This is survival. He gave me a long, knowing look before pocketing the papers. You'll get your story. But you know how this works, once I publish, you can't control what happens next. I don't want control, I said. I want the truth out. But the words tasted like a lie. I did want control. I wanted to see David fall. When Marcus left, I stayed at the cafe for nearly an hour, staring at the empty seat across from me. I kept replaying the image of David's face when the article went live, shattered, exposed. And then my stomach twisted, because for the first time I realized I was savoring it. "You're becoming him," a small voice whispered. I pushed it down. By the time I got back to the vineyard, the sun was sinking behind the hills, painting the valley in bruised purples and gold. The air smelled of fermenting grapes, a smell that used to soothe me, now only reminding me how fragile everything was. I poured myself a glass of Cabernet I couldn't taste and tried to focus on the next steps: damage control, security upgrades, maybe even leaving Napa for a few days until things settled. That's when my phone buzzed. No name. No message. Just an image. I opened it, my pulse spiking. A photo of my house. Taken from inside my gate. I dropped the glass, crimson wine splattering across the tile like blood. This wasn't about land anymore. This was about survival. David's estate sat like a fortress at the edge of the valley, glass, stone, and arrogance perched on stolen dreams. I hadn't planned to come here tonight, but after that photo from inside my gate, after days of silence from him, I couldn't sit and wait anymore. I needed answers. He opened the door himself, looking worse than I'd ever seen him. His suit jacket hung loose, his shirt half unbuttoned, his face sallow and unshaven. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were still alive, burning with a kind of manic energy. "Claire," he said, leaning against the frame. "Come to gloat?" I brushed past him into the house. "No. I came to find out what you're really playing at." He laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "Oh, still pretending you're in control. Cute." "I'm not pretending." "Then why are you shaking?" I looked down. My hands were trembling, but not from fear. From fury. "You sent someone to my house," I said. His smirk faltered. "What?" "The notes. The vandalism. The picture. Was that you?" He waved a dismissive hand, collapsing onto the leather couch. "You really think I'd waste my time with scare tactics? I've been dealing with bigger problems than you." "Like what?" I pressed. For a second, his mask slipped. He rubbed his face with both hands, muttering something I couldn't make out. "Tell me," I demanded. He looked up, and for once, there was no performance in his eyes, just raw desperation. "You think you hurt me by selling to Hale?" "You didn't hurt me, Claire. You killed me." I froze. "I was drowning before this," he said, his voice rising, teetering between anger and hysteria. "You think I wanted that resort because I love hospitality? No. I needed it. I needed those parcels to secure my loans." "Loans?" "Not from banks," he admitted, laughing bitterly. "Real banks wouldn't touch me anymore. I had to go elsewhere. People who don't care about missed payments, just results." My blood ran cold. "Criminal loans?" He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "You think Richard Hale's scary? Try defaulting on a cartel's money. See how long you keep your hands." I took a step back, the room suddenly smaller, the air thicker. "David." He grinned, unhinged now. "You wanted to destroy me? Congratulations. You've done it. But you didn't just ruin me, Claire. You signed my death warrant." Before I could respond, the sound of engines roared outside. David's head whipped toward the window. "What the hell?" Then came the shouting. "Police! Open the door!" He bolted upright, panic flashing across his face. "No, no, no." The front door exploded open, and suddenly the room was filled with officers, guns raised, tactical gear shining under the recessed lights. David Montgomery, you're under arrest for fraud, extortion, and money laundering. David's body went rigid as they yanked his arms behind his back. This is a mistake. I didn't, Claire. He twisted toward me, his voice wild. This is your fault. I didn't move. I just watched as they dragged him out of the house, his shouts echoing through the empty halls. It should have felt like victory. But all I felt was hollow. 2 weeks later, I walked out of the courthouse, the gavel's echo still in my ears. David was gone, at least for now. The case was done. It was supposed to be over. I stepped into the cool afternoon air and pulled out my phone, needing the distraction. That's when I saw it. A news alert. Montgomery Vineyard reborn under new name, Hale announces new luxury brand in Napa. My chest tightened. He'd done it. Richard had taken my land and turned it into something else entirely. And suddenly, I wasn't sure if I'd won at all. They thought I'd lost everything. But I'd only just begun. The morning air in Napa feels different at dawn. It's heavier, quieter, like the whole valley is still deciding whether to wake up. I stand at the edge of the vineyard, not Richard's vineyard, not David's, not my father's. Mine. Again. It doesn't look like much yet. Rows of young vines, still fragile, still finding their place in the earth. But they're mine, planted with my money, my hands, and my vision. No name on the gate. No Montgomery Vineyard to remind me of the battles I've fought and the people I've buried in my memory. Just a quiet, deliberate rebirth under a new identity, Rosa Brava, a name chosen for its meaning, wild rose. Untamed. Resilient. It took everything I had, financially, emotionally, to get here. Selling the valley to Richard had been a gamble, but it gave me the one thing I hadn't had in years, freedom. I used the money to buy this land, to build something smaller but purer. And when David's estate was seized by the courts, I leased the surrounding acres through a third-party LLC. David Montgomery's dream home and resort now sit on land that ultimately feeds into mine. The irony tastes sweeter than any wine I'll ever make. People talk about revenge like it's fire, hot, consuming. But this? This isn't fire. This is soil. Quiet. Steady. Capable of growing something new from the ashes. For weeks after David's arrest, I'd felt untethered. I'd thought destroying him would bring me peace, but all it brought was silence, a hollow victory echoing in an empty house. It wasn't until I stepped back into the dirt, planting vine after vine, that I felt whole again. Elena showed up the first day of planting. We didn't talk much, too many wounds still healing between us, but she stayed. We worked in the mud together, side by side like old times. When we finally sat under the oak tree at sunset, blistered and aching, she said, "Your dad would be proud." For the first time in months, I let myself believe it. Even Richard, in his way, seemed impressed. He stopped by unannounced a week ago, walking the rows like a man inspecting his kingdom. "Not bad," he said, lighting a cigar. "Though you know you'll be competing with me now." "Good," I replied. He laughed, but I wasn't joking. This wasn't about beating Richard or David or anyone else. This was about planting something that was mine, with no one else's shadow hanging over it. Now, as the first light breaks across the horizon, I walk between the rows, my boots sinking into the damp soil. I run my hand along the fragile leaves, whispering to them like my father used to. Grow. Endure. Live. The world feels still. For once, so do I. I close my eyes and breathe it in, the smell of new life, of possibility. The quiet hum of the valley waking up around me. People will talk. They'll say I lost everything. They'll say I let men like Richard and David dictate the shape of my life. But they'll be wrong. I didn't lose. I replanted. And like the vines, I'll grow back stronger. The sun crests over the hills, bathing the vineyard in gold. For the first time in a long time, I don't feel like I'm standing in a battlefield. I feel like I'm home.